Well, good morning and welcome to Cass City Missionary Church. I'm Pastor Jeremy, and it's great to see everyone here. I'm glad you guys chose to come and worship with us this week, the spring break week. So many people are traveling and just getting back from traveling. And Sherry, it's great to have you back. So you're on the recovery list, Don, doing well. Good to see everyone. Well, I guess I should mention those online too. We're welcome. We're always thankful you guys are watching. We will have communion at the end of this service. So if you're watching online, if you're here, we'll have the elements here and we'll pass those out to you and call you forward. If you're at home, you're welcome to grab some crackers or bread or juice or water or whatever you desire for the elements and join us in communion later this service. So that opportunity is coming up. I do hope it was a great week. Yesterday I had the privilege of officiating Judy Boyce's funeral and celebration of life. And it was really great, a great time here. The family wanted to express their gratitude for the use of the church, and especially the meal afterwards. They were very thankful, and they just kept going on and on about how great we served them during this time of need, and especially the kitchen committee. We thank you guys for all the hard work you do to serve this family and make them feel at home. And they sent me with a thank you for all the work that you've done. They really wanted to just appreciate that. It was great to hear Judy's life. And talk with the family, and you can tell a lot about a person's life about how their kids are. And these kids were adults, but they were full of joy. At a time that they had need and sorrow and loss, they were making sure they were ministering to me and bringing joy and peace. And it was great to be around them during this time. And then get to hear the testimonies of Judy and through her family and many people that spoke at the funeral home or at the funeral. But not only that, at lunch. Came up and told me how Judy impacted their life. And it was amazing to see how broad her net went and how many people she shared her testimony with and her testimony of faith. And it was great. It was just encouraging for me to see how well, and that's what they all said, is Judy loved us well. It didn't matter where we were, what situation we found ourselves in, Judy loved us. And that was encouraging to me, especially since we're in this Living Free and Loving Well series, and we're moving on to week 4 of that. It fits so well. It was just a great encouragement for me coming in here to talk about what I have to talk about because Judy did this so well. So we are going to move on with our Galatians series. And the first couple of weeks, Paul really talked a lot about, and he talked in desperation about the people in Galatia and their need to hold true to the one true gospel. To not let it be tainted with these outside influences that were being brought in. And he called it the gospel of grace. And we see in chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, Paul was making that plea. He's saying he was astonished that so many were quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ. And that was his gospel, the grace of Christ. And we were turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. He goes, evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. And that's what Paul is writing this letter for. To preserve the one true gospel, the gospel of the grace of Christ, and making sure that all the people in this church and the churches that were around it understood that the grace of Christ plus nothing is what the gospel is all about. And then we talked about our testimony and how to share our testimony and the importance of our testimony and the fact that Paul says that if you believe in Christ, if you believe this one true gospel, your life will be transformed. You will be made a new creation. You will have a different life going forward. And that was exactly Paul's own testimony. It was a but when God testimony is what we call it, but when God. And verses 13, and we kind of mashed them together. This is Paul. He says, you have heard how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. But when God called me by his grace and was pleased to reveal his son to me, so that I might preach him into the Gentiles. And that's the turning point for Paul's life, is when God interrupted his life, when God introduced him to his son, when they met Jesus, their life was different. He says, before I met Christ, I was persecuting the church. I was evil, and I did evil things. I was trying to destroy it. But when God called me by his grace and introduced me to his son, my life was different. And I preached a different gospel. And that needs to be our testimony. And it was fitting that the Sunday that we preached the testimony Sunday, the very next Monday I went to go visit Judy in the hospital. And just getting to know her a little bit, and she's telling about her faith, and she never hesitated to share about her faith in God. And how even though all these medical things were happening and the future was uncertain with where she would go and what facility she would go to, not where she would go for eternity, but what facility she was headed to, what operation needed to be happen, what procedure had to be done. She said, I'm at peace because we have a loving God, and I know Jesus Christ, and I know where my salvation is. And she was at peace through all that turmoil. But then she turned to me and she looked at me right in the eyes. And she said, but what's your testimony? And I just got done sharing it Sunday, and I did it with a smile on my face. I said, well, my testimony was I was lost without Christ, but then God showed me who Christ was. And I thought I was a good person, but then God showed me I was a sinner. And I received Christ as my Savior and shared a little bit of my testimony. And she lit up and she beamed and she encouraged me. And I couldn't leave that hospital room without her giving me a gift of some kind. So she had a gift basket and she said, take some candy. You have to take something. I said, no, that's for you. She goes, no, take something, please. And in the midst of me visiting her and supposed to be encouraging her, she encouraged me because of God and because of Christ. And that was her testimony. And I just thought it was so fitting with her life and the last couple of weeks of her life that I could preach about giving your testimony and be ready and walk into a hospital room and be asked that question by someone who had a wonderful testimony. So that was what Paul was talking about. When God shows us our Son, we're different. And our life is transformed. And now we can live free. We're not longer bonded by the law and the rules and trying to perform for God. We're no longer bonded by sin. We're free from all of that. And we're free to live a life with a new spirit. And that's what we talked about last week. We no longer live by the flesh and the results of the flesh, which is turmoil and hate and disruption and alcoholism and despair and sinful sexual immoral acts and those things. We're no longer produce that fruit. We have a new spirit that begins to produce a new fruit in us, and the spirit begins to grow in us and sprout this new fruit. And that fruit should be evident to others around us. They should see that. They should experience that when they interact with us. And we should walk in that spirit. And that's just sprout in us a patience, a self-control, a love, a joy, and so on. And so Galatians 5:16 says, and this is Paul saying, walk by the Spirit so you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Instead, you're gratifying the desires of the Spirit. And so that was kind of the springboard to chapter 6, and that's where we find ourselves now. And Paul tells us exactly how we're to act with each other. He's not talking to the outside world now, or how we evangelize, or how we reach the lost. He's saying, how should you guys act now that you guys are in the Spirit, and you guys are walking by the Spirit, and you guys are growing in the Spirit? How do you guys treat each other? How do you guys love each other? And that's really for all of us. And Paul's now going to go from, here's the reality of the gospel message. Here's what happens when you accept it. Here's how you should walk now that you accept it. And this is what it should look like in everyday life and what it should produce. And so we're going to start in chapter 6, and we'll just jump right in. The first 10 verses, he says, brothers and sisters. So we're talking to brothers and sisters in Christ. He's talking to us. If someone's caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks there is something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to anyone else or someone else. For each should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction from the word should share all good things with their instructor. Do not be deceived, for God can be mocked. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. I'm putting the King James version in my head for some reason. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, for the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good. For the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have an opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of the believers. So that's a lot, and we're not going to get to all of it. In fact, it's going to be hard to move past the first 2 verses, but I wanted to give you the context and the spirit of what Paul was saying, because he's moving from, here's what your new spirit should produce, and now how are we going to act with each other? So every once in a while, we may see a track race, and maybe a high school or college or professional. If you ever watch a race, people running, you'll see everyone lined up at the start line, and then there's some type of signal, a gunshot or a horn or something for them all to start to run. And everyone starts to run, and they all have the same goal, to get to the finish line as fast as possible. to secure their place in first or second or third, whatever their goal is to finish the race for themselves, to run the best race they can as fast as they can and get to the finish line, no matter what. No matter what happens, that's their goal, is beat themselves, beat their own record, and get to the line as fast as they can. Well, every once in a while, during these races, you'll see that a kid or a participant will take a misstep, or they'll step wrong, or they'll twist an ankle, or maybe they didn't stretch well enough, so they'll pull a hamstring, or maybe they'll accidentally step on someone else's foot and they find themselves in some pain. They're usually on the ground and they're rolling around in pain, and everyone else is just running the race, and here's this one person in pain. They misstepped, or they turned an ankle, or they pulled a muscle, and now they're kind of in pain on the track, and everyone runs. And that happens quite a bit in these races. Very rarely, and on a rare occasion, we get to see sometimes that happens where everyone's running and someone falls and someone gets hurt, someone takes a misstep, and they find themselves in pain on the ground, and another runner will stop. They will stop the race. They will forgo their place in the race. They'll give up their goal of what they're trying to achieve, and they'll come back and they'll help that person up and make sure that they limp to the finish line and finish the race with them. They do what Paul's is telling us to do, is that if we see someone misstep, if we see someone fall into sin, get caught up in sin, that we're not going to just move past them and leave them behind, that we'll actually help them along and get them to the finish line. And sometimes that means you have to shoulder their burden, and you have to actually put them on your shoulders and help them limp to the line, helping those who misstep or fall. He's saying, because those of you who are lived by the Spirit are tasked with helping each other, to carrying each other's burdens, to making sure that we all finish the race. And going back to chapter 5 and verse 25, we're told that if we're Spirit-led, we should do these things. We should keep in step with the Spirit. We should be Spirit-led. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And that's what Paul's talking about. He says, if someone was caught in sin and you're Spirit-led, then this is what you should do. You should keep in step with the Spirit, and you should act this way. You should help that person. You should carry that person's burden. You should help them along if you're keeping in step with the Spirit. So I believe chapter 6 is kind of a practical way for us to live and to walk and keep in step with the Spirit. And it tells us exactly what it looks like. But we have to understand some things about chapter 6, because we're told how we should love each other and how we should try and live by the Spirit in everyday lives. And the first thing that Paul says in chapter 6 is to care for one another, especially care for the ones that are hurting. Or it says caught up in sin. And so let me start with what this doesn't mean, because the English language doesn't do the Greek language justice sometimes. We say caught up in sin, but it doesn't mean that now we're all investigators and we're out to catch people in their sin. It doesn't mean that Paul's saying, I want all you guys to go out there and just watch closely. Watch what they say, because they might cuss. Watch what they drink. Watch what they do, because you want to catch them if they're doing something bad. You want to get them caught up. It's not saying that at all. It's not saying that we're peeking in windows of houses, or we're sticking our nose in people's businesses where it doesn't belong. It's not saying that now we're all in charge of monitoring each other's every single behavior, and we're coming from a place where we're right and you're wrong, and I'm just going to prove it. And then too often these verses and verses like it are used for that purpose. Sometimes we think that we're given permission, that Paul's given us permission now to become hall monitors. I don't know if you guys know hall monitors. Maybe you young kids don't have hall monitors anymore. When I was in school, kids were selected to be hall monitors. So every once in a while, a kid would have enough credit in their classes that they could take a study hall or something, and they would select some kids, and they would, for that hour, they were a hall monitor. They got the authority to make sure no one was in the hall when they weren't supposed to be in the hall. If you're in class, you're supposed to be in class, then in the hall. And these hall monitors could do one of two things. They could have a pass. So like if I'm caught in the hall, which I was caught quite often when you're supposed to be in class, I could say, I'm just going to the bathroom. And they could give me a hall pass, and I could go to the bathroom, and that's it. If I was caught in the gym or something, then I was outside my hall pass. Or they could write me up and send me to the office. These hall monitors weren't very liked. They weren't very well liked, because their job was to catch people doing things they weren't supposed to do. That was their job. And some people think, well, Paul's giving us a license to be a hall monitor. I mean, we're going to be a hall monitor of sin and catch people in sin, and we're going to be the ones that distract them. And that's not what Paul's saying. Now, I will just confess that I had a study hall, and they tried to make me a hall monitor for one day. And I realized I had hall passes. I could give anyone I want a hall pass. So I went to everyone's class that I liked, a handful of my friends, and wrote them a pass to the office. And I went and said, "Oh, so Johnny needs to go to the office. Mike needs to go to the office. Tom needs to go to the office." And then we all went down and played basketball. It turns out that doesn't do well. So then they stuck me in the library and pretty much said to sit down and shut up the rest of the semester and don't talk. That didn't work out either. But that's an example of what a hall monitor does. And too many Christians will read this and say, well, now I get to be the hall monitor of sin. And too easily that turns into, I'm looking for people's sins, their downfalls, because I'm better than they are. But then it moves to, it's not even about sin. I'm looking for people to do things I don't like what they do, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it. I'm looking for people to say things and to disagree with me, and I'm going to point out that they're wrong and I'm right. And it causes a lot of chaos. So Paul's not giving us permission to be hall monitors. And being caught in sin should be translated, and probably is better translated, more accurately translated, to be if you find someone trapped in sin. If you find someone now in prisoner in sin, because everything Paul's talking about is living free. We're free to live. And if you come across someone, and one translation said, if you happen to accidentally realize that someone's trapped in sin, like they're struggling with sin, they're hurting because of sin, then you should go and love that person. You should go and say, there's a better life for you. There's a more free life for you. Let me help you. You should take loving action. So the spirit of this verse is not that people go around and point out all the wrong that they see, and it's their responsibility to correct everyone. But at the same time, Paul's not saying that if you notice someone's sin, you can stick your head in the sand and just forget about it. Because let's face it, if we notice things that aren't right and someone's spirit's not right, it's so much easier just to say, you know what, forget that. I'm not getting involved in that. That sounds messy. And Paul's saying, no, you can't stick your head in the sand. That's not loving. He's saying, if you're spirit-led, you're going to love well. And you're not going to go out to right the wrongs of the world, but you're going to go out to help people along and take loving action. And you're not going to forget and just leave someone behind if they're trapped in sin. And not that you're going to catch them in it. It's not an aha moment, like I found out your sin, now you're busted. It's a, man, I noticed this about you. Can I help you along the way? Because ignoring it is equally harmful. And sometimes we see things going on, we think, boy, that's going to get messy. I'm just not going to deal with that. That's not my place. And so Paul's saying that's not the answer either. It's not that we're trying to expose sin, but if we do find out a brother or sister is trapped in sin, he's saying now they're snared by something and they're hung up on something. Maybe it's on forgiveness even. Then we say, I want to help you set you free. I want to help show you a new way. So caught up in sin is not the aha, I got you moment that we're looking for. But it's more of a, oh, hey, brother, hey, sister. I see you're trapped. I see something's wrong with your spirit. I see something's restricting you from living free like Paul tells us to do in Galatians. Can you tell me more about that? Let me come alongside you. Let me lift you up a little bit. Let me help you limp along until you can walk again. So I should also address this word sin because in this verse, the very same verse that uses caught up, they use sin. And our English language is kind of lazy, and we don't know how to say sin the same way that the Greeks said it. So we pretty much say sin, and in a lot of places in the Bible, it just translates as sin, and we have to figure out what that means. But the reality was there were 7 different words, Greek words for sin. And they all didn't mean the same things. And some verses will use those different words and then translate them. So we might say, one verse might say trespasses, transgressions, and sin. And in other places, those same transgressions are just translated sin because they stand alone. But if there's more than one sin word in there, they have to translate them different words. So, but we just do sin, and then we try and figure out what that means. And so I want to talk about the sin that Paul's talking about. And Paul was so brilliant with his words. He knew how to talk, and he's talking about walking with the Spirit, talking about walking with the Spirit, like how you walk in the Spirit, how you walk your everyday life. So when he says sin, he's not talking about, well, I got a couple different words up here, I think, right? There's harmatia, which is completely missed the mark. That's the word for sin. That's completely missing the mark. He talked about these things in verse 5 when he says, if you're living by the flesh, you're going to be found drunkenness. You're going to be found in sexual immorality. You're completely missing the mark. Like, you're not even close. In Romans, he says, we're sin. We all fall short of the glory of God. We're all sinful. We're on the wrong path entirely. Like, before we accept Christ in our life, I was walking down the path that was acceptable to use my hall passes to go play basketball. I was completely in the wrong track. But then God interrupted my life, and God showed me Jesus, and he put me on the right track. And so this sin that this is the most common use of sin, is we just completely miss the mark. We're like way out in left field. We're not even close to where we're supposed to be. But that's not the word he uses in chapter 6, because he's talking about walking in the Spirit. He's talking about believers in Christ. We're on the right path, and we're doing our best. But he's using this other word, paratoma. This paratoma, it's a false step, or it's a slip. He's talking about walking, and the people of the day would have understood the difference between those. He's saying if you're walking on the path and you just take one misstep, or you take like the corners here and you fall off of it a little bit, or you twist an ankle, or it's a false step and you fall down, like something, and it's usually accidental. It's not on purpose. You just find yourself in this situation. You find yourself, and then that one false step will just get you caught up in it. And now you're laying on the track and you can't get yourself up. And you're just rolling around in pain and you're kind of stuck there. He's saying, I know you're running your race and you're responsible for yourself, and you're not going to compare yourself to others because you're responsible to God and Jesus. And it's not a sliding scale. And that's why the rest of the verse says, everyone carry their own burden. Because it's not a sliding scale. If I'm doing great and April's doing better, that doesn't make me do worse. It's between me and God. But at the same time, we're burdened to help other people along. So he's saying you're walking in the Spirit. For those of you walking in the Spirit, sometimes you'll take a misstep and you need some help along the way. And that's the type of sin he's talking about. It's a false step. It's a slip in the path. It's you running the race. You're on the right track. You're on the right path and you're going the right direction, but you just took a bad step. And now you're hurting and you need someone to step in. And Paul's saying if you see someone, if you discover that and you recognize that in someone's spirit, love them well, and do it gently. Because in Galatians, in this context, Paul's saying that we're supposed to be walking as free men and women. We're supposed to be walking in the Spirit of God. And we're supposed to possess all the fruit. So as a believer, because what does it look like if we take a false step? We'll start to diminish the fruit in our life. This fruit of the Spirit in our life will become less and less evident. And so when we're supposed to be walking free, we're supposed to be walking in the spirit of love. We're supposed to be walking in the spirit of joy. We're supposed to be walking in the spirit of peace, spirit of forbearance, spirit of kindness, spirit of goodness, spirit of faithfulness. We're supposed to be walking in the spirit of gentleness and of self-control. Paul's saying that's what it looks like to be free. But sometimes you fall in these traps of sin. You get snared by them. You fall into them. You take a misstep. And then when we see someone like that, or maybe there's times that we're like that, we're no longer living free. We're trapped. We're living as a prisoner to our flesh again. And it's going to be evident in the way we act. So we're not catching people in the sinful act. We're not catching people. We're not hiding in the fridge to see if they crack a beer open. But we're looking and we're noticing that the spirit is off. So someone characterized by this type of sin, characterized with this spirit, now we're not going to see them for the love they have. We're not going to recognize, they're not going to be talking about the things that they love, they'll be talking about what they hate. Instead of the joyful spirit that we know, they're going to have a misery about them. There's going to be an anger in place of where the peace should be. There's going to be an annoyance with everything around them instead of a patience. Instead of being spirit-filled, there's going to be a mean-spiritedness, a spite-filled attitude. Instead of kindness, there's going to be this mean-spirited. Instead of goodness, there'll be a coldness or an indifference to the world around them, to the people around them. Instead of being gentle, they could be very harsh. Instead of being in control of themselves and what they do, they could be very impulsive and erratic. And Paul's saying when you see these people, this is the stuff that believers fall, these are traps that believers fall into. Discontent and spitefulness and harshness and anger. Anger at the world around them, anger at the government, anger at their election, anger at everything around them. And that becomes their identity. He says when you see people in this spirit, Paul says, make it clear that they're trapped and they're caught up in sin. And he tasks us who are believers, who are walking in the Spirit, to stay on the path, to walk in step for ourselves, but also we should come alongside them in the natural course of our relationships. And we should come alongside them, we should gently restore them to the path of freedom. Gently restore them. Gently. So I got to tell myself, we should gently restore them because I'm a parent. And sometimes my goal is just to correct. And know what? I'm right, you're wrong, kid. How many times do you guys hear that at home? You're just a kid, I'm right, I'm an adult, I'm right, you're wrong, so just listen. My job's to correct. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to correct. And there's ways I can do it, and I've done them all. You can yell and shout and forcefully correct, and sometimes that's necessary. I was thinking of my oldest daughter, who's now perfect and beautiful, but she was once 2. And she was perfect and beautiful then too. But we lived in a busy street in Saginaw, and we were going for a walk to get some ice cream. And it was at this part of her life where the stroller wasn't cool anymore, so she has to get in the stroller, out of the stroller. She falls to get in. Then we're walking just fine, and she has to get in it. So you have to stop, and you have to get her out, and she falls on the curb. It's really annoying, that stage. So we were doing that. So this 15-minute walk is going to be like an hour and a half at the rate we're going. But then she gets distracted by flowers or whatever she gets distracted by, and she starts to veer off and head towards this busy street. And I'm thinking she's going to get hit by a car, so I yell at her, and I grab her arm, and I yank her back on the sidewalk, and I save her life. Forcefully. Because it's necessary, right? And I'm angry, and I'm panicked, I'm frustrated, and she doesn't know I just saved her life. All she sees is I grabbed her by her arm and yanked her back on the sidewalk, and she's like, what do you do that for? So for the next 3 days, all I hear is mean daddy hurt my arm and pulled me, and then yelled at me. But I was correcting her, and it was right for me to do that. And that was my corrective spirit. And sometimes as parents, we correct with the threats. If you ever do that again. If you think you could get away with that, keep that up. And it's for me to deter them. It's for me to correct their behavior, to keep them on the right path, right? That's my heart. But it usually stirs up bitterness. And it's not really loving. It's loving in the sense I want them to do the right thing, but it becomes more about behavior management than heart change. But then there are times when they're really struggling. And there are times when we sit down with them, and Mackenzie was an example. We had the moments with Thomas, all the kids. And I say, something's going on. What's going on? Your behavior at school isn't right. What's happening? Your grades are slipping. What do you need? And April and I, or maybe April's better at this than me, she'll say, well, how can we help you? What do you need? This isn't right. This behavior's not right. It can't happen. But what's happening? Are you not doing well in school? Did you get in a fight? Did your friends mean to you? Did you have enough for lunch? What is happening that's causing these things, and how can I help you? This isn't the way we're supposed to go. This isn't the way it's supposed to go. I know you're hurt, and I know that things aren't right, but what can we do to make it better? How can I correct you? And so there's these 3 methods, all do the same thing. They correct the behavior. But one of them helps build this relationship and change their heart and shows a different kind of love than the other ones are. It's not merely focused on a behavior correction or behavior modification. Now it's about raising someone up in love so that they feel complete and they can complete the task and they can do the things. When Paul's saying, in the course of your relationship with others, try to be gentle with each other, especially for those who took a misstep. Because now they're hurting. Now they're on the ground laying. And it doesn't help for you guys just to put your heads down and keep running your race and just leave them behind. And it definitely doesn't help to all circle around and point, man, that must hurt. Man, you really fell there. Did you break an ankle? Well, I see that. You fell in that trap pretty good. Why didn't you avoid that? You should have seen that coming. That certainly doesn't help. And he spent the whole previous chapters and writing this whole letter telling us that you need to receive the gospel message and the Spirit of Christ in you. It's a gospel of grace. And out of that, you'll have this new spirit, and it'll be budding in you, and these new attributes and this new spirit will arise in you, and this new fruit will form, and you'll mature in that over time. And you're going to have to be spiritually mature if you want to gently guide someone to the path of righteousness again. It's going to take someone with spiritual maturity to care more about loving that person who's trapped and helping them out of that trap than being right about the fact that they're in a trap. It's going to take a really spiritually mature person to really care about someone's life and the trap that they're in, the sin that they're caught up in, than to just merely get them to behave the way you want them to behave. It takes maturity to do that. Restoring someone who's in sin should always be done with the purpose of restoring the relationship that you have with them and that they have with God, not merely controlling the behavior so they do the things that you want them to do. But that means we should already have an existing relationship. Chances are, if you haven't taken the time to build a relationship with somebody, then you're not going to be in a good position to restore them if they fall. So chances are, if you haven't taken the time to build a relationship with somebody, you pointing out their flaws is going to be like to them, you noticing a speck in their eye when you have a log in yours. If you haven't taken the time to build a relationship with them, chances are you can't put your arm around them and them trust you enough to help them along. But those that come along, a brother or sister, it implies that you already have a relationship with them. And especially a brother or sister in need. And we start to rebuild that relationship with love, and we build upon that relationship, we're in a much better position to help each other. And turn that attitude of bitterness into joy, or the attitude of hate into love again. And Paul's saying that this is what it's like to be in ministry. And we're all called to be in ministry with each other. He's saying brothers and sisters. He's not saying pastors and elders. He's saying, brother, every believer in Christ, you have the Spirit in you. You're called to minister to each other. You're called to carry each other's burdens. And in doing so, you're fulfilling the law of Christ, he says. I don't know about you. I want to fulfill the law of Christ. And he's saying the way to do it is to be in relationship with each other and love each other so much that the behavior is not as important as the relationship. And that's the law of Christ. And by doing that and sharing each other's burdens, we're doing exactly what Christ commanded us to do when he said to love each other well and to do the restoration work needed for his church. And Jesus was our perfect example. He came down to this earth and he had all the power and authority of heaven at his disposal. And he chose, with that all the power and all the authority of heaven and earth, he chose not to be a hall monitor. He could have been the ultimate hall monitor of all hall monitors and found out all of our sin and pointed it out and made a spectacle of all of us. But instead, he came down to earth to serve us, to be a servant. Mark 10:45 says, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Galatians is the only place that Paul talks about the servanthood of Christ and the humbleness of Christ and calls us to be like Christ. In Philippians 2, one that's been very near to me for my ministry, and we'll just do 5 through 8, Paul says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset of Christ. Just be like Christ. What the heck? Just do it. No big deal. Just be just like Christ. And then he says, Christ, who being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. If it was a race, he would have blown us out of the water. He had the very nature of God to use at his disposal. He had all the authority of heaven to use in any way he chose to make us behave however we wanted and teach us a lesson. Rather than doing that, though, he made himself nothing by taking the form of the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus came to this earth and he chose to humble himself, to take on the very nature of a servant, to carry our burdens for us, not be a hall monitor. And there's nothing we can do. Paul says to be like Christ, but there's nothing we can do to match what Christ did. I mean, he was in heaven. He was in heaven as God. Don't have to answer to anyone, don't have to do anything, and he gave that up to come down to earth. That's a greater sacrifice than any of us could make. We can't equal that. If he would have came down to earth and been the King of Kings, and he was, but in the physical sense, the King of Kings, and he was 12 feet tall, and he made us all like fan him and feed him grapes, and that's all we could do all day long, that would have been the greatest sacrifice that was ever made for humans. to be God and come down and be served that way. We couldn't match the sacrifice. That still would have been the greatest sacrifice. He gave up being in heaven as God to come down on earth. So even being the greatest man here ever, all of us are his slaves, would have been the greatest sacrifice. But he didn't do that. He humbled himself to the point of being a baby, an infant. He couldn't even walk. He gave up all the attributes of God. He couldn't even walk. He couldn't talk. We can't match that type of sacrifice. And then he came down, and it blows my mind that he became obedient. You know, he had to learn to be obedient. Who's God to obedient to in heaven? God the Creator. And Jesus was there at the creation. Who would they have to be obedient to? Nothing. No one. Nothing. There's no obedience to be had. They do what they want, and their nature is their nature, and they are who they are. They don't have to be obedient to anyone. But Christ had to learn to be obedient here on earth. That blows my mind. How do you do that? Now, we learn to be obedient by being corrected by our parents, by making mistakes, by falling into sin and being helped out of it. Jesus didn't do that. He learned to be obedient by obeying what was told of him. He connected to his Father and doing what his Father's will. And the more he did it, the more he was obedient. He became obedient even to death. Now, Paul never leaves out the obedience. He doesn't say people will fall into sin and disobedient. That's okay. Just don't worry about that. That's okay. Anyone can do that. He didn't say be a burden to people by continuing sinning. He said be obedient. Be like Christ. Christ himself became obedient to death, and we'll never have to be that obedient. At least we haven't yet. We have to be obedient. We have to sacrifice things, but not our very life, at least in this moment. But Christ did. So Paul's saying, be like him. Be a servant for others. Be obedient to God. Don't view yourself as the one that God put here to humble others. The one that God put here to make sure others are in step and walking on the path perfectly. Do it yourself. You're responsible for your own life to walk in your step. But if you happen to see a brother trapped in sin, then it's your job to love them and carry them and pick them up and say, let's limp together for a little bit because we have this relationship and I want that to be restored. Can we get down the path a little bit further and then you can walk on your own again and you're completely on your own and completely restored? And can we do that gently because we care more about the relationship with Christ and the relationship with each other as a church being restored than we do about being right? Than we do about behavior correction? Do we do about doing the things I want to do? I'd rather have this relationship where we're all together, walking the race, and we're doing it well. And could you imagine being a Spirit-filled church where Paul says, just do it, which means that it should be an expectation. But occasionally in church, we'll see somebody that is Spirit-filled, and man, they're great to be around. And just being in their presence, you're at peace. And when you're hurting, you actually can go to them and confess your sins and say, I did this, and man, I'm in a mess, and you know that they're going to love you out of it. And they're going to come alongside you. Paul says that should be the expectation, not the rare occasion. Paul's saying all of you guys are in this together, brothers and sisters. That includes everybody. Could you imagine having a church where people ran to us when they fell and got hurt? When they fell into sin, when they're trapped in sin, instead of trying to hide it from us because we don't want the hall monitor to catch us. I tried to hide in a locker one time to get away from the hall monitor. That was dumb. But could you imagine instead of them trying to run from us and hide it from us, that they could have come to us and confess it, and because they know they'll be restored. They know that we care more about their relationship with them than we do about being right, about pointing out their sin. That we're such a restorative people and a loving people, and that's what Paul's saying is love well. You have this new spirit in you. The Spirit is love. The Spirit is peace. The Spirit is joy. You have that in you. The rest should be going away, and you guys should be maturing to a point so that people can't help but come to you when they're hurt and say, "Help me up. Can you walk with me for a little bit?" That's what that's what Paul calls us to do, and says, if you're doing that, then you're completing the law of Christ. You're doing the work of the church. We should love each other well, and it's in that spirit that we're going to move into this time of communion together. We're all in this together, brothers and sisters. We're all together, and we're going to take communion together because it is because of the one Spirit. The one sacrifice that Christ made that any of this is possible. So I'll pray and the band will come up and then we'll take communion together. Father, we do thank you for this message, God. We thank you that Paul takes the extra step to make sure that we know that the expectation is we love each other well. And that you gave us a spirit to do that. That we should care less about the behaviors of others and more about the relationship with them. We should care less about pointing out they're wrong and we're right, or at least we didn't do that. And we should definitely not just look away when people sin and fall into these traps, and they're trapped in this misery, and their spirit of anger is in them, and the spirit of discontent is in them, because we know that's not the spirit that you have for us. And that's a spirit of bondage. And you say that we should be free. God, so give us the heart to love each other well and have this perfect relationship with us already, so that when something's off and we need to restore someone, that they can receive it well, because they know that we care first and foremost about their relationship with you and about their life. Not about how they make us feel or how they treat us, but how they're living and how they're not at peace, and we want to restore them to the path. They just took a misstep sometimes. Sometimes I take a misstep, and I hurt a little bit, and I need someone to lean on. So God, I'm thankful for all the people you put in my life that I can go to, and they're spirit-filled, and they restore me with themselves, and with you. And then pretty soon I'm walking on my own again, and it feels pretty good, and I know I'm on the right path. So God, help us be those people that the community comes to, that we come to for each other, family members come to, and we're the people that restore. Because your Spirit's in us. We don't judge, and we certainly don't just ignore them. We don't walk on by. We don't worry about finishing our own race. We take the time to complete your commandments and love each other well. God, we thank you for the possibility of that because of your Spirit. And it's in your Son's name we pray.